Hey, it's Lisa Campion again. I'm so glad to talk to you about, and this is kind of a fun one for me. Why are hospitals always so haunted? Dude, they really are. They're mad haunted. So I was working with one of my psychic students the other day who came to me looking for some psychic development training. And she works as a nurse at an ICU unit in one of those big hospitals in Boston. And she was having all these psychic experiences on her ICU floor that she just couldn't quite understand them. She couldn't stop them. And she's trying to understand them. So she works the overnight shift. And she told me it was about and let's call her Annie. It was about 3 a.m. It's sort of the witching hours, sort of the time of night when things are really the veil between the worlds is the thinnest, and we can see the spirits of who's ever around a lot better at that time. So she told me the story about how she heard the call button ringing repeatedly in this room. And she leaves her nurse's station, she's walking towards that room, and as she's getting closer, she can hear like muttering, crying, whimpering, all this noise coming from that room, sort of moaning and calling out for help was the way she described it to me. And she gets closer, and the lights are flickering on and off, like flashing, sort of flickering a little bit. And so she gets worried. So she like runs in there expecting to find somebody in distress. And the room was empty, right? So the person who had been there last had passed away um, before she got on her shift. And, it was a busy floor. She forgot momentarily that room was empty. And then later that same night, she felt somebody touch her. She was back at her nurse's station. She felt somebody touch her and saw out of the corner of her eye, she looked, and then she saw out of the corner of her eye a sort of white mist floating down the hallway. And um, and she was telling me that this is like a daily occurrence for her. It's happening all the time. And that what she does is she says a little prayer for them to help them move on if she feels like they're around. My suggestion to her was that she get some psychic development training because she works in an environment that's very psychically charged. Hospitals have a lot of psychic energy. Sometimes they're really haunted too, or they often are. And it's very like full of psychic spiritual energy. Um, you know, I think we can get kind of worried from watching a lot of horror movies or things like that about haunted hospitals, that it's like something, really horrific in there, but it's oftentimes more subtle and interesting than what we see in horror movies. But I wanted to talk today about like why hospitals are such powerful centers of paranormal activity. Part of it has to do with the buildup of residual energy. So sometimes the haunting type experiences are really what we call residual hauntings. And residual energy is sort of the accumulation of the thoughts, feelings, traumas, crises that happen in hospitals on the daily. And it's like the physical environment of the hospital, the material, the walls, the floor, the ceilings, the furniture get carry sort of the emotional imprint of everything that happens there. And think about all the things that happen in a hospital. So, that there's people dying, people being born, there's people in pain and suffering, lots of emotional energy, lots of life and death going on there. Leave and that all that emotion and psychic energy leaves a mark on the environments. And I think we can think about this residual energy as kind of like layers of sediment in a riverbed, right? Each day kind of adds a new layer on top of it. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but it's so intense, like all the time, what's going on in hospitals, right? And it's not just the patients, it's the families of the patients, the people that work there. And without proper kind of spiritual cleansing, which does have to say hardly ever happens, these layers sort of combine over time and create this residual murky psychic energy that we can be really sensitive to, especially if you're a sensitive, psychic, empathic type. You're going to feel that. I have been in hospitals where the room it's so that residual energy is so thick, you just feel like you're walking through, invisible syrup. And one time this was actually a hospital that did call me in to do a clearing back in the day when I did them. I don't do it anymore, but there was a nurse that she's like, "Can you come in on the down low and clear this because it's bad?" And it was an old hospital that a former tuberculosis ward that had been turned into administrative offices, and the staff there was always complaining about feeling really drained, feeling really depressed, even though when you looked around the space, it looked like fresh and modern. But I could feel when I walked through that room, like this sort of lingering misery, and fear, and sort of the feeling of death that came from, people who had spent years, months pretty miserable on this confined tuberculosis ward. So if I had my way, I would just have a part of every hospital staff people who could do spiritual cleansing, shamans, psychics, feng shui practitioners. It's like you need to kind of clean those places out on the daily. But if you are in a place like that and you want to do something, you can do what I do, which is carry around a little mini space clearing set in my purse. And what I use is a 528 tuning fork. And because you can bang that, I use this when I go to hotels too. You bang it, and that sound, it's really small, so it fits in a purse. That sound is really incredibly good at breaking up residual energy. It's not like you can always like bust out the sage in a hospital, right? That people don't like that smoky stuff in there. So sometimes we can't use things like that, although that would be good if you ever can do that. Sage is incredibly good at clearing residual energy. It doesn't always work with clearing leftover spirits, but it is really good with the residual energy. So the other thing that I use is these flower essences. I like the ones from a company called Petal Tones. And that's petal like flower petals, tones like musical tones, right? And there's a space clearing set that I use. There's one called Clear to Light and Astral Clear. Those are the two. They're colorless, odorless. They're not essential oils. They don't have any smell. And I just kind of splash them around a little bit. You can put them on the palms of your hands and run them through your energy field. And you can, put them in a mist bottle and spray them around too. And that Clear to Light is incredibly good at clearing away residual energy. And the Astral Clear is great at clearing spirits. I've really never found anything better at clearing away ghosts, astral entities, like whatever's around that doesn't need to be there, kind of creates an opening for them. So you can find them at petaltonesusa.com if you're interested. And I don't have a stake in it. I'm just I just want to give you guys the good stuff. So the other thing that happens in hospitals is kind of sort of like the portal effect. Because there's so much dying, sometimes people being born, people dying, every birth and death that happens in a place creates a momentary opening between our world and the spirit realm. It's a bit like the door opening briefly and closing again. And in hospitals where these transitions are happening a lot, the repeated opening of that pathway between our side and the other side can create kind of like a permanent doorway that's open all the time, like a portal. And sometimes these portals attract spirits that don't have anything to do with the hospital. They're just they just find an open doorway and walk through. It's sort of an access point where wandering spirits can leave and also come through. So yeah, there's a lot of portals in hospital, and we never really know what comes through them. Sometimes it's a big surprise, really. The other thing that happens too is that a lot of the way people die in hospitals, especially if there's an emergency room or emergency department that's treat or casualty department, people die suddenly. When somebody passes away and they're not expecting it, they can be sort of in shock. It's sort of true when they say, like, remember the old they don't know they're dead thing from the movie The Sixth Sense. Well, yeah, they might not know they're dead if it happened unexpectedly or traumatically. And I think that kind of creates a bit of a lag time in our crossing over. Like we need a minute. We need a minute to figure out what happened. We can kind of get stuck there. They get spirits of the dead can get lost and confused with a sudden passing. Um, I also think that the life-saving, life-prolonging equipment that we use in hospitals can, like it's like we have kind of an appointed time of death or the body dies, and the spirit tries to leave, but can't really because the body is still being sustained by life-preserving equipment. And that I see those beings as like almost like ghosts or spirits that are attached to their body by this cord, right? And then maybe later on the body dies if they're taken off life support and the body finally dies. The spirits can be a bit stuck, especially if it was a sudden death or a death they weren't expecting or haven't had really time to process that. So again, that's where we need like the shaman, the psychic in the hospital can kind of help the souls who are lost find their way. It's a bit like you missed the exit on the highway, and now you're like, what how do I get out of here? What happened? I don't know how this all came to be, right? So sometimes one of my students is a nurse, the student Annie, and she studied with me and she learned how to open call in the angels that assist people with living and dying. She knows how to call in create a gateway or a portal that they can all go into. And she says she does that every day when she's on staff, and she just feels like the spirits all moving up and crossing over. So like, here's the exit on the highway and here's how you go. I do think if you are visiting a hospital or you work in a hospital, it's super important to have some techniques or psychic protection techniques to help you, especially if you're working in an environment like that and you're sensitive. So I recommend kind of energy shielding, grounding, clearing, protecting yourself. Maybe the bubble of light can be super helpful. A golden bubble or a white light bubble. Just imagine before you go into the hospital, take a few breaths, be in your body, and then visualize that there's a big bubble around you, usually about arm's length out. So that bubble represents the outside edge of your energy field. And that is kind of like our first line of protection for psychic self-defense. So if you're going with your bubble intact, that can be quite a good thing to do. And I also think we need to have a clearing routine afterwards too. So, and after you're done in the hospital and you leave, you want to clear off any energy that you picked up that isn't yours. Residual energy is kind of that mucky energy we're talking about can kind of stick on you. So I think a salt in your bathtub or salt scrub in your shower are really good. You might imagine when you're in the shower, just like I'm intending that this water wash off any negative energy that I picked up or any energy that isn't mine that I picked up. You can even visualize that you're standing under a waterfall of light, and that light is washing away energy that doesn't belong to you. We're going to go back to the tuning forks here. Use that 528 tuning fork in your own energy field to clear it. Use those 2 petal tone flower essences, the astral clear and the clear light. Drop a little. We don't take them internally. We don't eat or drink them. Put them in the palm of your hands. Rub your hands together and then run it through your energy field. I never leave home without these. They're in my purse right now. And if I was in a hospital, I'd definitely be doing that in the parking lot and probably using my 528 too. Also, smudge yourself. Use sage or Palo Santo can really helpful. I think grounding is really important, especially if you're working in that environment where there's a lot of stress. You can just take a breath, right? When you feel ungrounded or you feel a little spacey or knocked out of your body, then breathe, feel your feet on the floor, bend your knees a little bit if you're standing up, or sit down and drop your tailbone drop that grounding cord down into the earth, put the roots down and really connect to your be inside your body. Take a couple of centering breaths. Maybe you carry some crystals, black tourmaline, smoky quartz, really good. Get outside, put your feet on the ground, take a few breaths. And I think always excusing yourself to the restroom, have a little alone, a minute in there, wash your hands with this water and soap. I'm washing away all the residual energy. Breathe and drop everything that you picked up down the grounding cord back into the earth. And then eventually you might get to the point like Annie did where she made the decision to train her psychic abilities. So she could turn them on and off when she needed them. She specialized in some mediumship stuff so she could help the spirits of the dead. And she took my psychic development class called Mastering Your Psychic Abilities. So that's super helpful to do that. Um, because I think if you're being around people that are living and dying, dying a lot can open our psychic ability even more. And that happens a lot to people who work with in these life or death situations. So I'll just leave you with this really beautiful story that Annie told me. She was sitting with somebody who was passing, she was on palliative care, and in the middle of the night, this older woman, she sat up in bed and she sort of like smiled and stretched out her arms, and she was crying, and she said, "Oh my God, they're here to come in. They're coming to get me." And she had been non-vocal for days, but she sat up and said that everyone that she loved was coming for her. She was describing them. She was talking about her relatives. She was talking about angels, and that Jesus came and took her hand and kissed it. And Annie said she looked like the happiest person she had ever seen. Um, and then she passed away shortly after that. So yeah, it's kind of a beautiful story, beautiful, touching story. Anyway, I hope if that helps you, if you spend time in hospitals or work there or visit there, try some of these tips and techniques and see if it helps you maintain your peace and poise in this psychically charged environment.